you ever hear knocking in the middle of the night, don't answer it. Even if it sounds like someone you love. Even if it sounds like yourself. That's the first thing investigators found, scribbled on the torn first page of the journal. When the city of Providence, Rhode Island, reclaimed the old Sableview Motel in the spring of 2019, everyone assumed it would be routine, a condemned property, a place no one cared about anymore. But room 305 wasn't empty. The door was locked from the inside. The metal lock rusted shut as if it hadn't turned in decades. When the building inspector forced the door open, the room looked frozen in time. A single chair sat in the middle of the floor. A leather-bound journal rested open on the seat, waiting as if someone had just stepped away. No one ever explained who left it there or why the last page was still wet with ink. All they knew was that the story inside didn't read like a story at all. It read like a warning. And if you keep listening, you'll understand why nobody should ever have crossed the threshold of room 305. The first entry was dated November 3rd, 1999. It began in neat handwriting. My name is Daniel Mercer. If you are reading this, I need you to believe every word I'm about to write. Daniel was 31 when he checked in. He'd come to Providence because he had nowhere else to go. Freshly divorced, fired from his job, and carrying a guilt he refused to name. The Sableview was cheap and anonymous. The perfect place to disappear without making a scene. He described the first nights as nothing special. The sheet smelled of mildew, the heater rattled whenever he turned it on. He thought the worst thing he'd face was loneliness. But then came the knocking. At first it was so soft he thought he imagined it. Just 3 gentle taps against the wall behind the headboard. He blamed old pipes or the wind. But the next night, it returned. 3 taps again, at exactly 2:13 a.m. The same time, the same rhythm. He lay there, eyes open in the dark, waiting to hear it again. Nothing came, until he started drifting back to sleep. Then he heard a voice, low and raspy. Daniel, are you awake? The third night, Daniel convinced himself he was dreaming. He left the bedside lamp on, propped the door open, and waited. Nothing happened. The room was silent. He began to relax, thinking exhaustion had finally caught up with him. But when he switched off the light and lay down, the air grew colder. The silence thickened. 3 taps, so close they seemed to echo inside his skull. Daniel, the voice whispered, softer now. I'm waiting for you. He bolted upright, heart hammering. His eyes adjusted to the dark. The door was still open, the hallway beyond it empty. But in the morning, the door was shut tight. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't remember getting up to close it. He started locking the door with the deadbolt. But the knocking didn't stop. Every night at 2:13, always the same pattern, always the same question. On November 6th, he wrote, If this keeps happening, I don't know how long I can stay here. The following morning, Daniel woke to find something that made him doubt his sanity. 3 long scratches had been gouged into the door from the inside, deep enough to leave splinters. He ran his fingers along the grooves, feeling the raw wood. His hands shook as he traced them. He went down to the front desk, hoping for any rational explanation. The man behind the counter, thin, pale, with watery blue eyes, just watched him with an unreadable expression. Room 305 shouldn't be occupied, the clerk said quietly. It was sealed 15 years ago. Daniel protested. He had a key. His rent was paid in cash for the whole month. But the man didn't argue. He just lowered his voice until it was barely a whisper. "If you stay, it will know you." Daniel returned to his room, more unsettled than before. He pressed his ear to the door that night, determined to hear the voice again and prove it was just an echo through old pipes. But at 2:13 a.m., something pressed back against the other side of the door. And this time he felt a fingertip dragging slowly down the wood, tracing the same 3 lines. On November 9th, Daniel decided he couldn't take another night. He spent the morning packing everything he owned into his battered suitcase. He left the journal on the chair by the window, as if abandoning it there would break whatever hold the room had over him. He took the key in his hand, bracing himself to walk out the door and never look back. But when he turned the knob, the door wouldn't move. He twisted harder until his wrist ached. The lock didn't budge. He tried the window next. The wooden frame was nailed shut, layers of old paint sealing every seam. He smashed at it with the heel of his palm, then with a coat hanger. Nothing gave way. His breathing turned ragged. Sweat prickled his scalp. He went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face. When he looked into the cracked mirror, he nearly screamed. Behind his reflection, standing in the doorway, was a shape, tall and gray, with arms too long to be human. Its head was tipped forward as if studying him, but where its face should have been was nothing but smooth skin. He spun around, heart thundering. The doorway was empty. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the urge to scream. When he opened them again, the mirror was clear. No shapes, no movement. But when he turned back to the door, something had changed. 3 new scratches marred the wood, fresh, splintered almost, deliberate, as if whoever, or whatever, had made them wanted him to know it was still there. That night, he lay awake on the narrow bed, the journal clutched to his chest like a shield. The clock ticked toward 2:13. His muscles locked tight with dread. When the knocking came, it was softer this time, almost polite. 3 gentle taps that seemed to echo inside his rib cage. He forced himself to speak, voice cracking. "What do you want?" Silence. Then from behind the door, a different voice answered. A voice that made his heart stutter in his chest. "Daniel, it's me. Let me in." It was Lisa, his ex-wife. Her voice was exactly as he remembered, warm, tinged with regret. He sat up, throat closing. "You're not real," he whispered. "You can't be here." The voice came again, softer, sadder. "I'm so cold, Daniel. Please, I need you to open the door." Tears welled in his eyes. He pressed his palms over his ears, shaking his head. The voice only grew more insistent. "Don't leave me out here alone." For a moment, he nearly reached for the knob. Nearly. But something deep inside him screamed that if he did, he'd never see daylight again. He backed away until he hit the far wall, sliding to the floor. He stayed there, shivering, until dawn crept through the thin curtains. When he finally closed his eyes, he could still hear Lisa whispering over and over, "Please, Daniel, please." November 12th. Daniel didn't write much that day. Just a single sentence, repeated over and over in shaky script. "It's learning my memories." That evening, he tried barricading the door with the dresser. He dragged the heavy wood across the floor until it blocked the threshold completely. He braced a chair against the knob. He even stuffed towels into the gap at the bottom, as if that could keep the voices out. But at exactly 2:13 a.m., the knocking came. 3 soft, measured taps. Then the voice called again. "Daniel, it's Lisa. You can't shut me out forever." He squeezed his eyes shut, heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He stayed curled in the corner until the first gray light of morning. When he finally stood, every muscle in his body ached. He dared to look at the door. The towels were undisturbed. The dresser hadn't moved. But something had pressed from the other side with such force the wood was bowed inward, warped around the invisible shape trying to get through. In the daylight, he tried to tell himself it was hallucination. Lack of sleep, stress. But when he opened the journal again, something was different. His own writing was gone. Every page now held only one sentence, scrawled in a jagged, unfamiliar hand. "Open the door." He tore out the pages and stuffed them under the mattress. But when he blinked, the writing was back. Impossible. Black letters bleeding through every line. He slammed the book shut, heart hammering. And for the first time, he truly believed he would not leave room 305 alive. November 15th. Daniel stopped eating. He could no longer taste food. Every mouthful turned to ash the moment it touched his tongue. He spent the hours before sunset pacing the room, clutching the journal like a lifeline. His eyes were red and hollow, his skin sallow with exhaustion. That night, the voice didn't wait for 2:13. It came as soon as darkness fell, drifting through the warped door like a cold draft. "Daniel, you're so tired. Let me help you rest." He shook his head violently. "You're not real," he rasped. "You're not Lisa," the voice sighed. "But I could be. I can be anything you want me to be. Just open the door." He pressed his back to the far wall, clutching the journal to his chest. Tears streaked down his cheeks. The knocking started again. Soft at first, then louder, faster. The walls began to vibrate. Dust rained from the ceiling in tiny drifts. "Daniel, it's so dark out here. Let me in. You don't have to be alone anymore." He felt his hand move without his permission, slowly reaching for the knob. His mind screamed for him to stop, but his body no longer listened. He dug his nails into his palm, hard enough to draw blood, trying to anchor himself to reality. Trying to remember he was still alive, still human. But in that moment, he understood something he could never unknow. Whatever was on the other side of that door, it had been waiting for him all along. November 16th. There were no more entries written in Daniel's hand. Everything we know about his final hours comes from the single recording investigators found in a small tape recorder left on the chair. The tape began with heavy breathing. Then, Daniel's voice, raw and hoarse. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. I'm so sorry. I thought I could be stronger. But no one is strong enough. Not when it knows your name." He paused then, breathing ragged. A faint knocking sounded in the background. 3 soft taps that grew steadily louder. He whispered, "It's at the door again. But it doesn't sound like Lisa anymore. It sounds like me." The knocking stopped. A moment of absolute silence. Then, in a perfect imitation of Daniel's own voice, something on the other side said, "Daniel, it's time." The tape shuddered with the sound of a chair scraping across the floor. Footsteps creaked slowly toward the door. Daniel's voice again. "I'm so tired. I just want it to stop." Another step, and Then the click of the lock turning. He whispered one last time, voice small as a child's. "I'm sorry, Lisa. I'm so sorry." The door opened with a slow groan. The air on the tape changed, growing colder, emptier. And then, nothing. No footsteps, no screams, only the hum of the old recorder, picking up the quiet of an empty room. When authorities finally forced their way into room 305, they found the door standing wide open. No sign of Daniel. No luggage. No trace that anyone had ever stayed there at all, except for the tape recorder, still humming in the middle of the floor. The journal was there too, but the pages had changed again. Every line was filled with the same sentence, written in that spidery black ink. "It feels like coming home." Police sealed the room and classified the disappearance as unexplained. Over time, the story drifted into legend. Locals told each other that the Sableview Motel was cursed, a place that took people when they were weakest, when they believed no one would come looking for them. But the building stayed empty, boarded up, forgotten, until the spring of 2019, when the city sent a demolition crew. They didn't expect to find anything inside, but when they broke the lock and stepped into room 305, they felt the temperature drop 10 degrees in a single breath. The journal waited on the chair, open to the last page, ink still glistening as if it had just been written. And in the doorway, pressed deep into the wood, were 3 fresh scratches. The demolition crew refused to work past sunset. Some said it was superstition, others said it was the cold. But when the city posted photos of the abandoned room just to document the condition, people noticed something unsettling. In every picture, the door to room 305 looked slightly ajar, even though the foreman swore he had shut it. Online forums began to share the story. Urban exploration channels on YouTube dissected the photos, frame by frame. Comment sections filled with theories. It was a mold hallucination. A squatter pretending to be a ghost. Just an elaborate viral hoax. But buried among the arguments were comments that felt different. Calmer, older. One anonymous user wrote, "I stayed there in 1984. It was never supposed to be rented again." The city knew, the owners knew, but someone always comes along who thinks they'll be the exception. Another simply said, "If you hear knocking, don't answer." A few months later, a paranormal podcast did an episode called The Disappearing Room. The hosts laughed nervously as they read Daniel's journal aloud, page by page. They called it a cautionary tale, nothing more than folklore dressed up as fact. But the last caller that night didn't sound amused. His voice was low and rough, the words slow, as if each cost something to say. "I knew Daniel Mercer," he began. "He was my brother." The hosts went silent. He wasn't the kind of man to make up stories. He was broken, yes, but he wasn't a liar. He called me the week before he vanished. Said something was in the walls, said it knew his name. I didn't believe him. He took a shaky breath. "I think that's what it wants, you know. For us to ignore it, to laugh. Because the moment you start to wonder, that's when it notices you back." There was a long pause before he added one last thing. "If you hear someone you love on the other side of the door, it isn't them." Then the line went dead. Some stories survive because they're true. Some survive because we need them to be true. To remind us there are places and moments that will never fit inside the neat boxes we build around our lives. Room 305 is one of those places. When the city finally tore down the Sableview Motel, the demolition crew refused to enter the room again. They sealed the door shut and knocked the walls down around it. Even then, the foreman swore he heard knocking. 3 soft taps that made the hairs on his arms stand straight up. No one stayed behind to investigate. No one wanted to be the last man standing there when the walls came down. They buried the remains of the motel under tons of concrete and gravel, paved over it, built a parking lot, and still, sometimes at night, security guards swear they see a single door standing in the darkness, perfectly intact, perfectly ordinary, until you look closer and see the scratches in the wood. I don't know if the voice ever stopped calling for Daniel, or if it found someone new. But if you remember nothing else from this story, remember this. Curiosity isn't always harmless. Some questions don't have safe answers, and some doors, once opened, never truly close. Daniel Mercer believed he could control what waited behind that door. He thought he could look it in the eye and walk away unscathed. He was wrong. The truth is, most of us will never face that choice. We'll never stand in front of something ancient and hungry, calling our names in the dark, but we will face moments when our curiosity whispers that we're different, that we're smarter, that we're immune. If you ever find yourself standing in front of an unmarked door, if you feel the air shift, if you hear a voice you recognize calling from the other side, turn around, walk away. Because if you step inside, you might never leave.